with a daring look, stood his ground. With a daring look, stood his ground. His finger touched Peter's neck. He sent shivers. With a daring look, stood his ground. His finger touched Peter's neck. He sent shivers straight to his manhood. He grabbed Peter's hand gently, yet firm, putting them in front of him and pausing. Peter felt safe in that moment. He spoke no words. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Dr. Kelvin went ahead to remove Peter's shirt and kissed his shoulders and ran his lips on the skin close to his ear. He beat Peter gently on his ears and it didn't hurt as Peter moved his body closer to Dr. Kelvin, wanting more. And at that moment, Dr. Kelvin pushed Peter gently onto the sofa chair in his office, guiding Peter into a world of pleasure he never knew existed. Peter James, a 19-year-old with short, neatly trimmed dark hair and a face that showed both youth and quiet determination, walked through the large gates of Bright Future University. His clean-shaven jawline and deep hazel eyes gave him a serious look, one that reflected the strong values he had learned growing up in a Christian home. Wearing a neatly ironed shirt and well-pressed trousers, Peter looked calm and prepared, as though he was already imagining himself in a court one day. At the gate, his parents, Mr. and Mrs. James, stopped to pray with him. His father's voice was steady and kind as he asked for God's guidance over Peter's new journey. Peter's mother, holding back tears of pride, smiled at her son. Peter bowed his head respectfully, moving his lips in silent prayer with them. The moment felt special and important, marking the start of a big step in Peter's life. As he entered the busy campus, Peter's focused and serious attitude made him stand out among the other students, who seemed more relaxed and casual. His eyes moved over the large stone buildings and the green lawns, taking it all in as he mentally prepared for the challenges ahead. During the orientation in the law faculty hall, Peter's calm and attentive behavior caught the attention of the dean. The dean, an older man with years of experience, glanced at Peter during his speech and said, "Bright Future University is proud to support students with great potential. Some of you here will become tomorrow's leaders." Peter felt his face warm with a slight blush, but he stayed composed and gave a small nod to acknowledge the dean's words. After the session ended, a few students whispered about Peter, noticing how confident and well-dressed he seemed, but Peter wasn't paying attention to them. His mind was clear on what mattered most: working hard, excelling in his studies, and staying true to the values his parents had taught him. Every evening, without fail, Taz's mother called him to check in and remind him of the values their family held dear. Her voice was warm but firm as she always spoke. "Peter, remember that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom," she would say, her tone full of care and hope. Peter listened quietly, his phone pressed to his ear as he sat at his small dorm desk. "Yes, Mom," he replied, his voice steady and calm. "I remember. I was still focused. I promise." In class, Peter's seriousness and clean-cut looks didn't go unnoticed. Girls often glanced his way, some whispering about how handsome he was. A few even tried to strike up conversations with him after lectures or lingered near his desk, hoping to catch his attention. But Peter stayed polite and distant, keeping the focus on his studies. When friends teased him about the attention he got, he only smiled and shook his head. "I am here to learn, not to get distracted," he would say, brushing off the comment. Deep down, he knew his parents were counting on him to stay on the right track, and he didn't want to disappoint them or himself. In the second semester, Peter met David, a lively and confident student who was the complete opposite of him. David was known for his bold fashion choices, bright shirt, ripped jeans, and a silver chain that always caught the light. He had a carefree attitude that made him popular with everyone, and his booming laughter could often be heard echoing through the halls. Peter first noticed David. During a group discussion in class, David spoke with ease and humor, his hands gesturing as he made everyone laugh. Peter couldn't help but be intrigued by him. He admired how David seemed so comfortable in his own skin, something Peter often struggled with. When David casually invited him to hang out after class, Peter hesitated but eventually said yes. Their friendship started with small things, grabbing coffee, sitting together during lunch, or walking around campus. David had a way of making the simplest moments feel exciting. He would nudge Peter playfully during conversations or rest his hand briefly on Peter's shoulder when making a point. Peter noticed these small touches and liked the warmth they brought, though he told himself it was just how David was, friendly and open with everyone. Peter began to admire David more than he realized. He liked how David's smile could light up a room and how his voice carried a confidence that made people stop and listen. David encouraged Peter to loosen up, joking that he was too serious for his own good. "You know, Peter," David said one evening as they sat on a bench under the soft glow of campus lights, "you've got to let yourself have fun sometimes. Life's not all about rules and academics." Peter chuckled, feeling a strange mix of nerves and comfort as David leaned in closer, their shoulders brushing. "I know," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "I am working on it." Peter didn't think much about why he felt drawn to David, why he enjoyed their time together so much, or why those brief touches stayed in his mind. To him, it was just part of their growing friendship, normal and nothing more. But deep down, he couldn't deny how much he looked forward to every moment they spent together. One Friday evening, David leaned against Peter's desk with his usual easy grin. "Come on, Peter, just one party. You have been studying too much. It's just a little fun break. You deserve it." Peter hesitated, his fingers fiddling with the edge of his notebook. He knew his parents wouldn't approve, but the idea of doing something outside his rigid routine felt strangely tempting. After a long pause, he nodded. "All right, but I'll have to tell my parents I have night classes." David laughed. "That's the spirit. Don't worry. You will thank me for this." That evening, Peter followed David to a part of town he had never visited before. As they approached the club, he noticed bright neon lights flashing and music thumping from inside. The energy was electric, and Peter felt both curious and uneasy. When they entered, he froze, his eyes widening at the sight before him. The room was packed with people, dancing under colorful strobe lights, the air thick with the sound of pulsing music. But what shocked Peter the most was that it wasn't like any other party he had imagined. It was a gay club. Shirtless men moved confidently on the dance floor, their bodies glistening under the lights. Some were laughing, holding hands, others kissing openly, and a few making out in dark corners. The scene felt like a world away from the life Peter knew. Peter's heart raced as he tried to take it all in. He felt out of place, his shirt buttoned up to the collar and his shoe polished. The energy of the room was overwhelming, but what caught him off guard even more was how his body reacted. He felt warm, his face flushing as he watched the carefree movement of the dancers. A strange sensation stirred within him, what he didn't quite understand but couldn't ignore. David noticed his wide-eyed expression and laughed, clapping him on the shoulder. "Relax, Peter. You look like you have just seen a ghost. This is just a party. People having fun. Loosen up." Peter swallowed hard, his voice shaking. I didn't know. I didn't expect," David grinned, nudging him playfully. "You are fine. No one is judging you here. Just have fun." But Peter didn't feel fine. His hands felt clammy and his chest tightened as he glanced around, unsure of where to look. He couldn't believe he was in a place like this, seeing things he had never imagined. and yet deep down, he couldn't deny a confusing mix of discomfort and fascination. Few weeks later, Dr. Kelvin, a charismatic law lecturer known for his sharp mind and confident presence, began noticing Peter in a way that was more than just academics. From the very first lecture, Peter's focus and intelligence stood out. His answers were thoughtful and his passion for law was clear. Dr. Kelvin couldn't help but be impressed, and he found himself keeping a closer eye on Peter as the weeks passed. After class one day, Dr. Kelvin approached Peter, his usual smile wider than normal. "Mr. James," he said, his voice low and smooth, "your contribution in class today were excellent. I can see you are really grasping the material. It is not something I see in most first-year students." Peter felt a little taken aback, but smiled politely. "Thank you, sir. I am trying to keep up." Dr. Kelvin's gaze lingered a moment longer than necessary. "I am sure you are doing more than just keeping up. You are excelling," he said, his tone almost personal. "In fact, I would like to offer you some extra guidance. You have a unique potential. We should meet outside of class to go over some of the more advanced concepts." Peter wasn't sure how to respond, but he nodded, grateful for the attention. "That sounds great, sir. I would appreciate the extra help." From then on, their meetings became more frequent. At first, they were just discussions about the course materials, but Dr. Kelvin's comments began to shift, becoming more personal and focused on Peter himself. "You have a sharp mind, Peter," Dr. Kelvin would say, his voice smooth and encouraging, but with an edge that Peter couldn't understand or ignore. "It is not just your academic work that impresses me. You have a certain presence about you." Peter would blush slightly, unsure how to react. He had never been the center of this kind of attention before. Dr. Kelvin's compliments felt good, but there was something in the way he looked at him, something that made Peter feel both flattered and uneasy. During one meeting, as they discussed a difficult case study, Dr. Kelvin leaned in just a little closer, his voice softer. "I have been following your work closely, Peter. You are one of the brightest students I have had in years." He paused, his eyes scanning Peter's face with an intensity that made Peter's stomach tighten. "And you know, it's not just your mind that stands out. You are also a very handsome young man, and you have a sexy body too, if you don't mind me saying." Peter felt his heart race, unsure how to respond. He had always admired Dr. Kelvin's intelligence, but now his words and the way he was looking at him made Peter feel exposed, as if he was being seen in a way he wasn't used to. "I appreciate that, sir," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Kelvin smiled, a glint of something in his eyes. "You should. You deserve to be noticed, and I think we will be very good acquaintances if you don't mind." His voice dropped lower, his gaze moving to Peter's lips for a brief moment before he caught himself. Peter felt a knot form in his stomach, his body reacting in ways he didn't fully understand. He quickly turned away, trying to focus on the work in front of him. But in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the strange feeling that Dr. Kelvin's attention was something entirely different than usual. David noticed Peter's discomfort one day after class, and he asked what the problem was. Peter went on to confide in David. David laughed hard at his innocence and asked him how he felt. Peter, who was confused, told David that he felt excited when close to Dr. Kelvin and that he could feel his manhood getting hard in that moment, but he felt guilty for harboring such feelings as it was against his teaching. David, however, brushed away his concerns and advised him to explore his feeling. Life is too short to hold back. After all, no one is going to know, and if it didn't work out, he could end it and move on. Peter began to question his values and curiosity. Weeks later, Peter waited till it was evening when he visited Dr. Kelvin's office. The lecturer, after weeks of self-reflection, finally made a move. He slowly went over to Peter, giving him time to stop or dash out his office. However, Peter, with a daring look, stood his ground. His finger touched Peter's neck. It sent shivers straight to his manhood. He grabbed Peter's hand gently, yet firm, putting them in front of him and pausing. Peter felt safe in that moment. He spoke no words. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Dr. Kelvin went ahead to remove Peter's shirt and kissed his shoulders and ran his lips on the skin close to his ear. He beat Peter gently on his ears and it didn't hurt as Peter moved his body closer to Dr. Kelvin, wanting more. And at that moment, Dr. Kelvin pushed Peter gently onto the sofa chair in his office, guiding Peter into a world of pleasure he never knew existed. Days later, after his encounter with Dr. Kelvin, Peter's emotions became awoken. He became obsessed with the lecturer, started seeking online knowledge from sites that would help him sexually satisfy Dr. Kelvin. He also looked for ways to see Dr. Kelvin in order to satisfy his newfound desire and urge. Dr. Kelvin did not mind as long as he enjoyed his affair with Peter. They would meet after school at hotels far from the school where no one would recognize them. However, Peter's focus on his studies began to waver. He began to skip classes and avoided assignments, prioritizing his secret relationship. His once stellar academic record began to slip. Even David noticed Peter's obsession with Dr. Kelvin. He tried advising Peter, but Peter told him not to worry as he was careful enough. Rumors about Peter and Dr. Kelvin started circulating amongst students and staff. Peter's frequent visit to Dr. Kelvin's office didn't go unnoticed, and whispers of an inappropriate relationship spread like wildfire. Dr. Kelvin, realizing the risk to his reputation and Peter's clinginess to him, became so bored of his affair with Peter. He decided to end the affair by telling him on the phone. Peter was devastated, unable to comprehend the rejection. He pleaded and professed his love to Dr. Kelvin, but the reply he got was, "You meant nothing to me." Days later, in a fit of rage, Peter confronted Dr. Kelvin in a public space. Their argument was overheard, solidifying the rumors. This resulted in the university administration investigating the affair. During the investigation, Peter's involvement with Dr. Kelvin came to light. Peter, emotional and hurt, inadvertently exposed details of their relationship so as to get back at Dr. Kelvin. The university went ahead to expel Peter for violating the institution's moral code. Dr. Kelvin's influence ensured he was merely transferred to another university, escaping severe consequences. When Peter sought solace from David, his friend denied any involvement with him, distancing himself to protect his own reputation and secret as gay. Peter felt utterly abandoned as he started his journey back home to his parents who had so much faith in him and his academics, and most importantly, a different version of Peter they would never have imagined.
Men to beat him up as he assaulted him. Obina's secret was revealed. The men discovered he was wearing a fake foam bra and realized that he was actually a man. The chief's anger intensified. Being homosexual was something despised and met with hostility in their society. It started like this. In the small village of Gold Coast, there lived a young boy named Obina. At 8 years old, Obina wasn't like the other boys in his neighborhood. He had a beautiful face that seemed almost sculpted, a face that attracted all eyes wherever he went. And it wasn't just his looks that set him apart, it was his love for makeup. He would often slip into his mother's dressing table, experimenting with her lipstick and brushes. His little hands applied the red lipstick with a precision that would surprise even a professional makeup artist. Makeup was his comfort, his escape from the world. His parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ez, were far too busy to notice the emotional needs of their only child. Mr. Ez was a strict and authoritarian father who believed that academic excellence was the only way to success. He had been raised in a harsh environment, disciplined mercilessly by his own father, which he believed had shaped him into the successful engineer he had become. To him, Obina was destined to follow the same path, and he did not take attention to his academic performance, determined that his son would surpass all his classmates. The weight of his father's expectations weighed heavily on Obina. Every day he was reminded that he had to surpass his classmates, whom his father considered his enemies. As a young child, Obinna received severe punishment from his father, who would hit him in the face and body if he dared to fail his homework or exams. The constant pressure and beatings turned the school into a battlefield where Obinna struggled. Not only to succeed, but to survive in a world where failure meant pain. Obinna turned to the one thing that brought him comfort, makeup. Since his early years. Whenever his father's beatings left marks on his face, Obinna's body was rushing towards her mother's makeup bag, using foundation to hide the bruises, applying blush and color to his cheeks, and finishing with his favorite red lipstick. He loved the feeling it gave him of feeling beautiful, powerful, in control of something. At the time, his mother, who had caught him wearing makeup once or twice, paid little attention to it. She was too busy with the multi-million-dollar business her husband had set up for her, a business for which she felt indebted to her. Never argued, Mr. Ease never intervened, and simply hoped that Obinna would overcome what she saw as a childish phase. One day, while Mrs. Ngozi was chatting with her friend in the living room, Obinna walked past her, his face carefully made up with lipstick, bursting that he loved so much. Her friend was shocked. "Don't you see your son, Mrs. Ngozi?" brushed the question aside with a laugh. "It's just child's play, he'll get tired of it." But her friend warned her, "You should stop this before it becomes something else, Mom." Ngozi sighed. "I do not really have a say when it comes to Obinna. I was just a poor girl who married into a rich family. I don't want to do anything that might bring my husband's wrath on me. Who am I to intervene?" She tried to change the subject, steering the conversation back to business. So Obinna continued to live his life in a quiet corner of his own world. His father, Mr. Ease, was only concerned about his son's academic performance, and Obinna worked tirelessly to meet his father's expectations. Even though the fear of failure haunted him, the boy was not pampered despite the family's wealth. He did the household chores, did the shopping, and always tried to do more to get some semblance of approval. The only place he found refuge was in his makeup, which his father knew nothing about. But Obinna was being watched. Mr. Musa, a man who lived in the next street, had been watching him for a while. Mesmerized by his beautiful face, he watched from his window as Obinna passed by on his daily errands, waiting for his one weekend. When Obinna's parents were home, Mr. Easy sent him on an errand. On the way, Obinna lost the money. He had been given, panic seized him, and he began to cry. Mr. Musa, who was watching him, saw his chance. He called Obinna, offered him a glass of milk to calm him down. Mr. Musa asked Obinna why he was crying, and Obinna told him everything. How was he so afraid to come in at home? Because his father would punish him mercilessly for losing the money. Mr. Musa quickly comforted Obinna, promising to give him back the lost money, but on one condition: as the drug began to take effect, weakening his muscles. Mr. Musa's face changed, revealing his true intentions. He took advantage of Obinna, bent him over, and did the unthinkable. What happened that day was too horrible for an 8-year-old to understand. When he was done, he handed Obinna the promised money, telling him not to tell anyone of their little secret. Obinna went home crying in the dark, unable to talk to his parents, who were not his friends, but distant figures imposing their rules and expectations. He cried all night, and this marked the first assault Obinna suffered of his short life. The trauma of that day added to the already growing pain in his young heart. With no one to turn to, no one who would understand or even care. Obinna's behavior became erratic at school. He became aggressive, attacking his classmates, seeing them as the enemies. His father had once told him about in a fit of storm. He broke another student's head during a fight. He was expelled, labeled a problem child. When the school reported the incident to his father, Mr. Ease flew into a rage. He harshly reprimanded Obinna, vowing to teach him discipline the hard way. He decided to send Obinna to his strict aunt in the village, a woman known for her rigid methods. Obinna was to remain there until it was corrected, and would not be allowed to return until he had been properly disciplined. His aunt was cruel, and her daughters were no better. She made fun of Obinna, forced him to do all the farm chores. He was the one who sold their goods at market under the scorching sun every day, and sadly they often forgot to leave food for Obinna before he came back from market, forcing him to drink gari every day and sleep hungry in the cassava barn. They called it discipline. One day when Obinna was returning from the market, 3 men hanging around a building under construction called out to him. "Why is your face so beautiful?" they mocked. They ordered Obinna not to shout or make noise, or they would kill him. in this abandoned building, and no one would ever know what happened. These men were homosexual, and they decided to abuse Obina once again, while one of them stood guard outside to make sure that no one approached the others. Purple one by one, when they were done, they gave him money as if it could make up for what he had done to him. Tears ran down Obina's cheeks as he used the money to buy some food, slowly and painfully realizing that it was the first time in years that he had eaten so well. The pain and suffering became too much for Obina. One day he took the money he had saved from his uncle and ran away from the village, hoping to return home to end his suffering. But when he arrived, his father was furious to see him back. "You are not supposed to be here," shouted. Mr. Ease especially, not before 2 years. He ordered his son to return immediately to the village and not to show his face at home until he had completed his time in the village with his aunt. His helpless mother watched in silence, tortured by pain. Knowing that there was nothing she could do to intervene, her fear of her husband's anger kept her mute. But the next day, Obina pretended to leave for the village, but instead he ran away this time with no place to go. He began to sleep on the side of the road, surviving on scraps. It was then that Lady Ogechi, a woman who ran a small parlor nearby, found him. She took pity on the young boy, offering him food and shelter in exchange. Obina worked in her parlor, sweeping, running errands, and eventually doing what he loved best: makeup. But every night in Lady Ogechi house, Obina noticed that she latter went out late at night, while he was sleeping, and came back the next day with a lot of money. He wondered where she always went. Soon Lady Ogechi began to look at Obina insistently, thinking how handsome he was and how she could profit from it. She decided to condition him to follow her to the brothel, where she worked at night so that he could work for her. There she always collect money from the rich men at Gay and offered Obina to them, telling him to behave before locking him in a room with the men. These men abused Obina again and again, still devouring him from behind, while Lady Ogechi took all the money, paying him with only food. Soon it became unbearable for Obina. He felt used, trapped. He had no good clothes to bring or anything else, knowing that he was being exploited. He found the courage to start taking money personally from the men. This sent Lady Ogechi into a rage. She lamented, crying over Obina's betrayal. After all she claimed to have done for him, she then threw him out of her house, hoping for the blow of men. She had put them in contact with no place to go. Obina found himself in another brothel. He implored the women there to let him stay with her, and they agreed on condition that he brought money for the brothel. This marked the beginning of Obina's new life as a prostitute. In this brothel, surrounded by people who had also known suffering, Obina found a semblance of peace. He dreamed of being able to save enough money to one day open his own makeup store, a place where he could be himself without fear. He clung to that dream with all the hope left in his young heart, believing that one day he could leave behind the shadows of his past and embark on a future where his talent and not his pain would define him for years to come. Passed, and Obina began to assume his identity in broad daylight. He grew up in the brothel and was fully identified as a woman. He accompanied the girls and stood at the side of the road where drunken men stopped at night to frequent the girls. Because he was so handsome, his drunken, intoxicated men mistook him for a woman. When they arrived at the hotel, he gave them one condition: that they go straight to the point and enter him from behind. He did not allow them to touch him or to do any form of foreplay with him, in order to prevent them from discovering that he was not really a woman. And if anyone refused, he would walk away, giving them their money back. As these men were drunk and did not realize that they were deceived, and he was not in company of a woman, but of a man, and so he always complied with her demands.
While Obina was walking with his companions in the street, they passed a poor old woman who was begging at the side of the road, while the others would not lend her anything, no attention. Obina felt a pang of pity for the woman. He returned later in the day to give her some money, and this became a regular habit. Over time they became friends. Obina took the poor homeless grandmother to a building still under construction, where she could find shelter. He brought her food and fed her day after day. The old woman was so grateful that she felt like she had found a son. People usually laughed at Obina every day when he passed by because of his appearance, but to the old woman he was a savior, although most people thought the worst of him and assumed he was worthless. Obina had a pure heart despite his suffering. At times he visited his grandmother. She tested him and was reading the Bible, preaching about God and the importance of having a constant relationship with him, no matter how difficult life gets. These words touched Obinna deeply, shaking him. Because he had never heard of God or felt God's love in his life, Obinna struggled inside, torn between giving his life to God or continuing with his only means of subsistence. Soon it was time for the grandmother to leave and to return to her village, where she hoped to await death. She had suffered all her life and felt ready to join God. She hugged Obinna tightly, begging him to do her one favor, give his life to God, no matter what. Obinna cried uncontrollably, knowing his only true friend was leaving for good. He made her a promise as he watched her leave, knowing he would never see her again. Before she left, she placed a Bible on the ground for Obinna, defying him to pick it up. The day he decides to give his life to God, she said the Bible would be waiting for him, and she would die happy if he did so. With tears in her eyes, Obinna stared at the Bible on the floor. He found himself at a crossroads, facing a decision: discover God or continue with his old ways that day. There, as he was walking home, Obinna couldn't stop thinking about it. All night his mind was tormented. Finally, he decided to go back and get the Bible and start a new life. But just before he could act on this decision, he received a call from one of his brothel sisters, who later came to his house to tell him about a millionaire man she had met. She explained to him that she had told the man that she would come with him and that he would be her clients. That night, Obinna told her he was done with that life and planned to leave the next day. However, she persuaded him to join her for the night, promising him a large sum of money and assuring him that he would never have to return to that life again. Obinna reluctantly agreed to accompany her to meet the client, hoping that it would be the last time. The girls offered their services to the wealthy man, who was very pleased that night when morning came. Obinna returned home with a large sum of money, which he had received, but his friend did not return with him. Unknown to Obinna, she had stolen money from the man and had fled with her millions. When the man discovered the theft, he flew into a mad rage. He decided to set a trap, calling both the girl and Obinna to meet him at the side of the road. The next evening, Obinna tried to reach his friend, whose number was no longer reachable. While the man complained of not having other choices, Obinna went innocently to the rendezvous with the man that evening. The man brought 4 men advanced towards him with a determined step. Their leader immediately began to accuse Obinna of styling their boss. Obinna tried to explain that he had no knowledge of any theft, but the chief ordered his men to beat him up as he assaulted him. Obinna's secret was revealed. The men discovered he was wearing a fake foam bra and realized that he was actually a man. The chief's anger intensified. Being homosexual was something despised and met with hostility in their society. The sun was setting, casting long shadows on the dusty streets where his bruised and broken body lay. Lying inert on the ground, his once beautiful face was now swollen and mutilated beyond recognition. Blood pooled beneath him, staining the earth. Bright, red stark contrast to the colorful makeup, his now forever closed eyes loved to wear the faintest hint of a tear, as if in those last moments he had glimpsed the promise he could never realize the day before. Obinna was filled with hope. For the first time, he'd considered the possibility of a different path, a life where he could finally be free from the chains he had held for so long. He stared at the Bible the old woman had left behind. The lure of the easy money his dangerous life offered, and the peace he felt in the presence of the grandmother who had become like family to him, the only person he had truly seen for what he was. But Obinna's heart was heavy as he tossed and turned in his bed. He thought of his grandmother's words, "Give your life to God," no matter what. Her voice echoed in his mind, soft but firm. She had held him so tight before leaving, her fragile arms transmitting a strength he had never felt in anyone else. He had promised he would try, and he intended to keep that promise. He had decided to pick up the Bible, to start over, to choose another life, but fate apparently had other plans. The unexpected visit from his brothel sister had been a test of his will. She had lured him back into his old ways. Just for one last night, he needed that money. She had insisted to finally escape the life he had imprisoned so long. Obinna had hesitated, torn between the promise he had made and the very desperate of what seemed to be his only option. "Just one last time," he had said, "and then I will be free." But on this last escapade, everything went wrong. He was not greeted with clemency, but with brutality. Men had set upon him, the points falling like lightning, their MUXs like knives. They had discovered his secret, and their anger had turned into a blind rage to them. He was not only a thief, but a disgrace and abomination in their eyes. His very existence was an offense to their beliefs and their values. Their fury was fueled by ignorance and hatred, and they built it without restraint. Mercilessly, Obinna had shouted, trying to explain, begging for his life. But his voice was lost in the blows that continued to rain down in the darkness that swallowed him whole. He had planned to pick up that Bible that day. He had planned to start a new life. But life had not given him the chance. Obinna lay there, his body cold under the dim glow of the streetlights. The world around him went on, unaware that he had lost a pure-hearted boy. A boy who had been dealt cruel cards, still found the strength to care for others, even when no one else cared about him. His dreams, his hopes, his promise to the only friend he had ever known, all of it was silenced in that moment in the hospital. Obinna's father lay on his sickbed, his face marked with regret. His health had been declining for months. His strength was fading from a mysterious illness that no doctor could cure. As he lay there, he thought of his son, the boy he had rejected in his quest for perfection. His heart ached with nostalgia for a desire he had never known. His father told him he was sorry, that he wished he had been a better father. But now it was too late. Obinna's mother sat in the hospital, hands shaking, thinking about her mistakes. Tears rose to her eyes as she whispered, "We will find him. He will come back to us." But deep in her heart, she felt an unspeakable terror. She had been complicit by her silence, by her failure to protect her child from the man she loved, and now she too would have to live with the knowledge that they had both failed. The one person they were supposed to love unconditionally. They didn't know that their son was gone, that he would never come back, that he would never cross the threshold again from their house. The Bible that the old woman had left lay in the excavation site untouched, waiting for a boy who would never come back to get it. A breath of wind passed, rustling its pages as if it too was mourning the loss of a soul to whom it had never given the village a chance to live. The old woman was sitting near her window, looking out at the horizon, waiting for news from Obinna. She knew her time was running out, but she clung to the hope that he would find his way to God. Her whisper, "Take care of the boy." She didn't know that he had already left this world, that his life had been cut short too soon, that his dreams had been crushed under the weight of a world that had never understood him. There, an old woman saying, "A child is like a seed. Feed it with love and it will blossom, neglect it and it will wither and die." Obinna was that seed, a beautiful soul who had the potential to blossom, to bring color to a world that desperately needed it. But instead, he had been left with his light extinguished by those who should have protected and loved him. Obinna's story is a warning to every parent, every guardian, every person with the power to shape a young life. It is a reminder that love and understanding are more powerful than any form of discipline or severity. A reminder that children are not meant to be molded in our image, but rather to be loved for who they are and free to discover their own path. Obinna did not die because he was weak or because he was lost. He died because the world betrayed him, because the people who should have loved him the most, who should have nurtured his unique gifts, turned their backs on him when he needed them most. His story be a lesson, a call to action for every parent and guardian, because a child is like clay. He takes the shape of the hands that shape him. May his hands be kind, may they be gentle, may they be filled with love. Because in the end, it is not the child who fails it. Is the world that fails the child, and so the name of Obinna fades into the silence of the night, a name that should have been remembered for his gifts, his kindness, his beauty. Instead, he is held for a shortened life, a broken promise. The wind carries his story, hoping it reaches the ears of those who still have a chance to make a difference, to save another.
Thank you so much for staying tuned until now. If you haven't subscribed, please do well to press on the subscription button and also do well to press on the notification bell so you are aware when next I'll be posting my next story. And until next time, bye-bye.